I'm Marianne Philbin, and I was part of the museum, the Peace Museum's development from inception, and ultimately was the director there for a number of years, but worked with Mark and Marjorie Benton, the other founder, the co-founders, since before it even opened its doors. So the Peace Museum was the first museum of its kind in the country, and there, of course, had been war museums forever and war memorials and studies of that sort of history, but there had never been a place devoted to peace education in this way. And the nature of the museum was that it would address issues of social justice, war and peace, human rights, etc., through the arts and humanities, through a very visual, immediate, personal, affecting way that was neither academic nor tedious in any way, and would help people become connected to, ultimately, to activism. But the purpose was to present exhibitions and programming and offer speakers and opportunities around kind of the history of peace and social justice and current issues related. I first learned about the Peace Museum through a little blurb in a column, which was Cup's column, an old Chicago newspaper, sort of legendary column back in the days of newspapers, that was just a little 2 lines that said the former U.S. ambassador to UNICEF and longtime Evanston activist, organizer, strategist, philanthropist Marjorie Benton was teaming up with the local muralist, Mark Rogovin, to launch this new institution called the Peace Museum, which was going to be dedicated to peace education through the arts and humanities. And it was very much a hybrid of 2 things that I was engaged in and that were of great interest to me, which was community arts and social change and the development of institutions that could really address in new ways long-standing kinds of issues and concerns. And so I wrote them a letter out of the blue, and they called me and said, "Oh, come meet, come, well, we're going to tell you about it." And I thought it already existed, because what did I know? It was like, oh, a museum, right? And so they gave me an address, and I was imagining I was going to be going to a place that would look like what we think of as museum. And I went there, and it was, before the building was even painted, it was an old warehouse at 364 West Erie. It was not the River North neighborhood that exists today. It was very much a warehouse district, not yet developed at all. There were a couple galleries. There was Mr. Beef on Orleans, and that was pretty much it out there. And so they opened the doors, and it was just like raw space, garbage, bits of lumber, toolboxes in the corner, wires springing out of the way. There was nothing there yet. But they were so excited, and Mark did a kind of a classic Mark thing, which I then saw him do many times in the years to come, where he walked me through the space and just painted a picture with words of this was going to be here, and this was going to be there, and over here we would do such and such, right? And so you couldn't help but be caught up in the vision he had. At the same time, you were thinking, like, is this going to happen? Because this is currently, we spent probably an hour and a half walking around a completely empty space while he spun this image. So I started volunteering, and then as soon as we got some funding, I became the first staff person along with Mark, and we took it from there. Well, the first exhibit was sort of to say we're here, and so it was based on materials that we could access relatively quickly through other, collections. So it was called Against the Wall, and it was a history of poster art around movements and campaigns and efforts for peace and justice, starting with some very early anti-war posters from World War I, which nobody even thinks existed, and carrying it on through. And that was what we opened with. But the first really significant exhibit was The Unforgettable Fire, which was an exhibition of the original drawings done by survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, of their firsthand memories and accounts of what they witnessed and lived through that day. And they had been collected by NHK, the Japanese television station, after just a real simple thing went out one night from a newscaster, kind of wondering whether or not anyone had memories or even drawings. And they were flooded with people sending these images, and they were not professional artists, right? So they were even more powerful, the way people couldn't say in words often what they'd been through, but they could, do these sketches and paintings and watercolors and whatnot. They were later declared Japanese national treasures and were never allowed to leave Japan again. But we were able to exhibit the originals and then made high-res, copies with permission, of course, so that we could make it a part of a traveling exhibit series that we later developed. It was very powerful, very extraordinary kind of witness by survivors, but also delivered in such an impactful way that message of what's at stake, right? And that was always something that particularly appealed to Marjorie Benton, the co-founder. She had been very involved in lots of advocacy and efforts on every possible scale, internationally and locally, around disarmament and children's welfare and human rights and the whole spectrum, right? And she would say in our early days, I've seen people's eyes glaze over when you're trying to basically grab them by the shoulders and say, you have to listen to this, you have to understand this, you have to take action on this. And at the Peace Museum, it was an opportunity to do it differently, to let people sort of experience through art what it was that you wanted them to have a deeper understanding of, and to motivate their own commitment to what maybe they could do in their own lives or their own communities, etc. So Mark and Marjorie Benton first met because Marjorie, who was doing a lot of work around disarmament, organized a protest outside what was at the time a convention for arms dealers, basically out in Rosemont. And it just appalling in all the ways you would imagine. And she was, an article appeared in a newspaper, and she was was photographed carrying a sign that said something, "No more arms bazaars." And it was a sign that Mark had made. And in Mark's way, as he had been thinking about this idea of a peace museum, maybe for I think about a year ahead of that, he had a list of names of people he wished he could meet or who might be interested in, and she was on it, and he didn't know how to reach her or connect her. And after that photograph appeared in the paper, that was his opening, and so he reached out and was like, "You're carrying my sign, and let's talk." And they just were so in sync, and Marjorie had 1,000 additional ideas to contribute, and in our initial earliest days, the three of us were a nicely balanced team, right? Because Mark was about an idea second, and let's pull in this person and this person and this person, and Marjorie had connections to a whole additional separate network and a vision that was related to her history and her work, and I had kind of the capacity and skills to like pull things together and write about it and frame it and create some of the messages and the structure that was needed to get it going. And then we had so many volunteers, and that really, throughout its history, I think that's what made the biggest difference. And Mark was terrific at pulling people in. He's, anyone who ever met him knows him as a natural-born salesman, right? And luckily, as somebody once said, luckily he's on our side, right? Because he could sell anybody anything. I think he had that gift. Because the museum was so unique, once it launched, we were pretty lucky to get a lot of media coverage, which really made a difference because we had no budget for advertising or PR. Like, people would only hear about it because they read a story. And it started out with local stories and local kinds of outlets, but then we were able, it sort of leapt ahead as even in our first 5 years, things really grew and garnered a lot of attention. So there were stories in the New York Times, in the Los Angeles Times, in, of course, the local papers, just a lot of coverage that made a difference. And one of the interesting themes that ran through them all and through all the coverage, and really was a hallmark of the museum for, I think, throughout its existence, was its enormous reliance on volunteers at every level. So it could be Terry Hemmert from WXRT Radio, who helped connect us with U2, who later sponsored one of our traveling exhibits in Dublin. Or it could be an electrician who we met at a hardware store while buying something in one of the aisles, and of course Mark would instantly start talking about the museum and zero in on what does this person do, how could we pull them in, is there a way they could help. And so we had everybody from really amazingly skilled gallerists who knew about exhibit installation, like Paul Gray of Richard Gray Galleries, coming on board as volunteers initially and later taking on much greater leadership roles, to one day we needed some paint, and through a friend of a friend, we contacted somebody out at the Naval Air Base, and we got the Navy to donate just 10-gallon buckets of gray, deck paint that we could use for the floors, which had, of course, constant high traffic and were constantly needing repainting. So it was always a small staff and relied on people. Luann Lewandowski, who was a volunteer, ran our membership program with Joanne Aono, who was also an artist, who would also help us hang the shows. And, it was a very kind of glorious time for all that, and a wonderful way in which the museum was brought to life. It really was an effort of many people, and many people found a way to channel their desire to do something positive and make a contribution in this terrific hands-on way. Sometimes that quality, where his relentless and largely nothing but positive promotion of the museum, because at the time we all lived and breathed it, and all of us would be waking up in the middle of the night scribbling notes about what we wanted to do on the next exhibit, and how we could tackle this new project. Ruth Barrett, who was the program director and curator, had just the most creative ideas about shows and outreach and how we could contact people that we might have otherwise not even thought to reach out to. But sometimes there would be a staff meeting and we would just want to get to what was on the list of what we needed to tackle. And whatever, the UPS guy would come to the door and Mark would be like, come in and sit down with us a minute. Let me run something past you. What would you think? We'd be like, we really have to get through this work. We can't stop and talk to every single human being about why the Peace Museum is important. And on the other hand, that was Mark's MO. He would stand if he could, he would stand on a corner and talk to every single person who passed about why the Peace Museum was important, how they could help, and how they should get involved. It was that aspect of the Peace Museum, our reliance on the kindness and the enthusiasm and the talents of volunteers. Although it was not intentional at the beginning, it was a financial reality. We had a small staff, we had very little money, we couldn't hire people. It became part of the museum's personality in a way that was really wonderful, right? We were able to build the kind of visitors and support and memberships because so many people had a very personal connection, right? It wasn't just like, oh, I read the article. They could say, I was there and helped repaint the walls and stayed up till 2 a.m, getting that done. Or, I'm the electrician who ran the wiring through the 3rd gallery, or whatever it may have been. We had some architects who redesigned the space when we opened the exhibit on popular music and social change, who were brilliant, Muller and Brown, and they did it on a pro bono basis, so that always made a big difference. And that's part of the story of every nonprofit to some degree, but I think particularly in that era, and particularly given the nature of this institution, contributing to this larger vision, and also it was fun, right? I mean, what's more fun than getting together with a group of people who are committed to a project and excited about it and figuring it out together and making it happen, whether it's a show or a campaign or a build, whatever it is, right? It just builds community and keeps, the energy was always so high in those first few years. Yeah. So once Mark had identified the building, which was on Erie Street, and of course we were leasing it, we weren't in a position to own it, and it was a small building on a fairly otherwise bleak and unpopulated street. There was no concept, the whole idea that there would be walk-ins or walk-by traffic wasn't even, River North was so at its early stages of development that we knew this would be a destination that people would have to choose to come to. But getting it from raw space to opening its doors in November of 1981 was again a matter of a lot of volunteers. We worked with carpenters and drywall hangers and designers and graphic artists and people who helped write proposals for us. And Ruth Barrett came to us through the Brethren Volunteer Corps as a placement, as an internship through BVC. So there was a lot of ways we tapped into sort of opportunities for service learning and volunteerism through other organizations. And then our own inner circle, I mean, Marjorie and her friends would come and literally help us uncrate things and load them up and hang lights and do whatever needed to be done. It was very much a sweat equity kind of situation with Mark as the barker, you know. I mean, Mark was always able to, you know, what do we need? And it could be something really specific, like we need somebody with a really good camera setup who can do high quality archival photographs, piece by piece, of the works in this exhibit. And like 3 days later, somehow that person would materialize and then be reeled into doing that for the museum for the next X number of months, or in some cases years, you know. Give Peace a Chance, it was called, which was the exhibit on music and social change, which I curated, and it was kind of a huge turning point for the museum in terms of visibility and support, and the crowds who came, and people seeing the museum as a place that was multimedia and hybrid and you know, lively in this whole new way, that it wasn't a static, you know, here's some flat art on a wall and we're going to lecture you. It was something that really drew a lot of people in new ways, and so that was a great one.
Yeah, I heard people came really far for that one too.
Yeah, we had we got a lot of coverage and a lot of support, and obviously there's, you know, there's no you can't underestimate, of course, the draw of the names that were being featured, whose contributions and stories were being told, and whose music was being highlighted. And, you know, Yoko got involved and lent us the guitar on which that had been engraved with John's drawings, that was at the famed 1969 Bed-In for Peace, and all sorts of other memorabilia from other artists. And that was when U2 was just coming to fame. They had just released the War album in 1982, and but we wanted to make sure that the exhibit came up as close as it could to the current moment. So, you know, we began with the earliest kinds of protest music, and where did that come from, and how did it relate to social movements of a given time period, and from Woody Guthrie but on up through the 80s, which of course now seems itself like 1,000 years ago, but it was a pretty extraordinary and beautiful exhibit.
And U2 went on to name one of their albums.
They became famous.
And they named an album after an exhibit.
After The Unforgettable Fire, yeah. They were quite moved by that exhibit, and also our exhibit on Martin Luther King, which remarkably at the time was the first time a museum had done an exhibition on the life and contributions of Martin Luther King. So the King Center in Atlanta had done a few things, but his birthday was not yet a holiday. Stevie Wonder and John Conyers were lobbying to make that a national holiday. That was back in like 1980 when that was all underway. So it was a different time, obviously, but yeah. So our exhibition on the life of Martin Luther King was very inspirational as well to U2, and the song in the Pride in the Name of Love was written after they saw the King exhibit, and is about Martin Luther King. And we developed a relationship with them that was really wonderful and supportive and all of that. when the museum launched the exhibit called Give Peace a Chance, which was on popular music and social change, and we were able to attract so much media coverage at that time, which really helped with the subsequent work of the year in the museum, because it brought this great visibility. Articles like this one from the Los Angeles Times not only told the story of that unique exhibition, but also touched on some of the work of other shows. Unforgettable Fire, this was an exhibit of Chilean arpilleras, which were pieces of fabric folk art that told what was happening in communities in Chile during the Pinochet era. And so those kinds of pieces really helped. The New York Times also did a big story on the Peace Museum and how it was the only one in the country. And locally, it was terrific. We always had a great deal of support. This was from an exhibit curated by Ruth Barrett and myself on teaching conflict resolution skills to children, and it was called Child's Play, and how how toys also could make a difference in terms of what was happening at the time around the how many war toys were on the market that particular season, and how parents could look at things differently. So the Reader, and this is a story from the Milwaukee Journal. Anyway, there was a great deal of coverage, and we had also a lot of support, as I mentioned before, from leaders in lots of different fields, and particularly the arts, again, from Studs Terkel to Yoko Ono. And Yoko came back for our 5th anniversary, which was lovely of her, and supported the museum for, this is from, I don't know if you can see that, the event, Sean and Yoko and me, and Terry Hemmert and Mark and Yoko at this celebration and fundraiser that we did. So we were always grateful for that support, and again, what kept it going though was the work that all sorts of volunteers did to just recreate the gallery in 100 different ways between every show, right? Because every show was so different, and we would use the space in completely different ways.